G'day and welcome to Dave's Model Workshop. Today I'm at Metro Hobbies, which is in the suburb of Box Hill here in Melbourne. It's pretty much my favourite Melbourne hobby shop, and I'm going to be meeting up with them to talk about radio control cars, because I've bought one and I don't know what I'm doing and what I need to get. I'm totally out of my depth. So today it's a noob's guide to building a Tamiya remote control car. Stick with me, it's noisy out here. So I'm here with Vasco from Metro Hobbies, and he's going to talk to us about people who want to build their own model as opposed to just walk in and buy one that's ready to run.
Alrighty.
So yeah, do many people want to build it themselves?
They do. There are quite a number of people that would prefer to build their own kits as opposed to getting it ready to run. They want to have that experience of that sense of achievement, I guess, when something is completed and they actually get to drive it.
Sure.
And it also gives them a leg up when it comes to working on the kit. So
and repairing it when things go wrong.
Yeah, so when things do go wrong or they need to do some maintenance, they know exactly how to pull it apart and put it back together. They have a much better understanding of how it all works, as opposed to getting it ready to run. You don't know where to start if you need to change a particular part. So.
Okay. So what does come with a typical build your own kit?
Well, with something like this, for example, in this case you get the motor included, which is a nice little bonus considering that some of the more expensive race kits you don't get anything.
Okay.
Some of them don't even come with wheels and tyres or even a body.
Okay.
So with something like this, you get the motor in there, you get all the hardware. I don't know if you get any tools with it, but you will need to obviously get your own tools. And then of course you'll need to match up the motor with electronic speed controller, radio, battery, charger, and then you're pretty much ready to go.
So that's probably a pretty good thing to talk about. So the stuff that I would need to get this up and running is the battery, the speed controller, the receiver and transmitter.
That's right. So we've got a couple of examples here. So we have radio, so this comes with the wheel radio as well as the receiver. So you've got that you're going to need. You're going to need a speed controller for your motor.
Okay.
So this is kind of like the brains of the car. It'll allow you to go forwards, back, all that sort of thing. Okay. You're going to need a battery. Now these are the two most common sort of size batteries that we sell for these types of kits. These are a nickel metal battery. They're an older style battery, but for this type of kit you don't really want to go overpowering it. They weren't designed. It's not designed to be overpowered to go into brushless motors and LiPo batteries. Although you could potentially run a LiPo in here to get a bit more efficiency. The nickel metals will do you just fine.
Okay.
They're a cheaper option. They're a lot easier to charge and maintain. Whilst LiPos you do need to take a little bit of extra care.
And what sort of runtime do you get with those?
It really depends on the car and the motor that it's running on and the type of driving that you do. So on average we always like to say, look, most cars will get you 10 to 15 minutes.
Okay, that's good.
But I was just speaking to a customer earlier this morning who was getting 30 plus minutes.
Wow.
So he was running a big battery, and I think on one of his cars he was getting close to an hour.
Okay,
so
wow.
Again, it really varies from one car to the next. The amount of power that you're running, the type of driving you do, the terrain that you run on will also play a part in it. So it's kind of hard to judge. We can give you a ballpark figure, but it's really hard to judge.
Sure. Okay.
But let's say, for argument's sake, if you were getting 15 minutes out of a 3,000 milliamp, a 5,000 milliamp could probably potentially push you over 20-25 minutes.
Wow. Okay.
With something like that. That's just as an example.
Okay.
So essentially what you're doing here is increasing the size of the fuel tank. You're not going to get more power out of it, it's just going to be longer run time.
Okay, that makes perfect sense.
And then of course you need a charger. Okay. So this will allow you to recharge the batteries. At 3 amps you'll charge, or at 5 amps for that one, you will charge these batteries in under an hour quite easily.
Wow, that's really fast.
So you get a couple of these. While you're using one, you recharge the other and keep cycling them like that.
Because I remember back in the 80s I had the Frog, and I remember it took overnight to charge, and then you'd get about like 8 minutes drive time tops. So
the chargers have come a long way. Something like this, which is a fairly basic charger for about $70, you get an LCD screen telling you the type of battery that you're charging, the type of how many milliamps have actually gone into the battery, what volts it's sitting at. It'll charge LiPo, variety of different chemistries.
So clever. That's cool.
So it does a lot of stuff, and then it beeps at you when it's all done. It shuts itself off and all that sort of thing. So yeah,
that's brilliant.
Really easy to use.
So I just wanted to have a chat to you about the different types of batteries, like Ni, Li. I totally am in the dark as to what they all are.
The two most common types of batteries that are used in RC are nickel metal hydrides and LiPo batteries. So LiPo batteries work quite different from nickel metals. And the first thing you're going to notice here, if I take this one out of the packet as well, is the different shapes that they are. Right? So they're both 5,000 milliamp. This one's a square pack and sort of around its more traditional size. It's been like this for decades.
Sure.
These you can get them in various different sizes and shapes and milliamp capacities. But one of the most noticeable differences is it's got this little dangly thing over here. So in basic terms, this is a 6-cell nickel metal hydrate. So you have 6 individual cells stacked up, and they charge all at the same time via the charge lead. The type of care that you need to take with this is obviously don't charge it too fast, so don't put too many amps through it. You can run it on pretty much most RCs all the way up until empty.
Sure.
And ideally you want to store them with pretty full charge in there. Don't store them empty, because they can be a little bit hard to revive up if they've been static for a long period of time, like months or years.
Sure. Okay.
So usually you want to have a bit of charge in these when you put them away. Now, these are a much more complicated beast. There's a lot of things that you need to know about these, and sometimes when people don't know what they're doing with them, that's when you hear about house fires and LiPo
which is bad, yeah,
and things like that.
Okay.
So yeah, which is bad. So let's start with the basics. This is a 2-cell LiPo. So essentially what happens in here, there are 2 long cells. They're like a chemical cell that are side by side. And when you charge this battery, they need to be balanced equally.
Okay.
You cannot just charge the battery willy-nilly, because if one cell has more discharge than the other,
sure,
when you plug this into the car is going to discharge both cells equally. It's going to pull the power. And what that means is, with LiPo batteries, they have a certain cut-off point. With nickel metals, you can run them right up until they stop.
So you'll just see like a gradual decline?
Gradual decline in power until the car doesn't run anymore.
Yep.
But with something like this, the speed controller will have a LiPo cutoff point, which means that once it detects an average voltage as your low voltage cutoff point, it'll shut the battery down. So it'll stop the car. So you'll be working away with the car, it looks great, everything works, and all of a sudden just stops.
Okay, so it's really
so it doesn't really decline.
Yeah.
That's your LiPo cutoff. Now your safe LiPo cutoff point for your cells, for your LiPo cells, as a bare minimum is about 3.2 volts. In most cases you want to set your LiPo cutoff at 3.4 volts, so that you have a little bit of a buffer.
Okay. Are you setting or?
So if these cells discharge below 3.2 volts, they can actually get damaged, and it can be very hard to recover and bring the volts back
Interesting,
up.
okay, right.
All right.
So they're much more temperamental.
So this is where things get a little bit more complicated. And the way that you balance charge is on the charger. You have your positive and negative there, but there's also a little port there that your balance lead needs to plug into. So the battery, when it's throwing power to these cells, is actually calculating the voltage on each individual cell, and it's balancing out the volts.
So clever.
Okay, so that is why it's important to always balance charge your batteries, just so that you maintain the same voltage, obviously.
Okay.
So that's one thing in regards to these. The other thing is they sometimes have a number on them that says 50C or 30C or 20C or whatever that is. That basically comes down to the discharge of the battery. How much volts or how much amps the battery can deliver depending on the power that the car is demanding.
Sure,
Okay? So when you pull the trigger on your remote, you insert volts. Volts spools up the motor then draws X amount of amps, and it's going to pull those amps, and the ESC, the brains, is going to go, okay, well you need that, I need to grab those amps from the battery and deliver them to the motor so that obviously it can keep going.
That makes sense, yeah.
If the C rating on a battery is too low and the motor is demanding more than what the battery can deliver, then it becomes a problem. And there are two outcomes that generally happens when something like this happens. Is the ESC, because it's pulling more than what the battery can deliver, can automatically detect a low voltage and hit cutoff. So you could have a fully charged pack, pull the trigger, the car starts to launch, and then it shuts down straight away.
Because it's trying to draw too much. Okay.
Alright, so you're straining the battery. If that doesn't happen, you can continue using the car, but the battery will either get very hot, or in worst case scenario, it can actually swollen, can swell up and puff. When the battery puffs, that means you've strained those cells are now damaged. Although the battery can still be used, it's not recommended that you keep using it because you're going to end up really damaging the battery.
Of course.
Okay, so you have to make sure that the C rating is high enough for the milliamps with the motor that you're using. A good way to calculate this, you divide whatever the milliamp is by 1000. So in this case we have 5. And you times that by the C rating. And that gives you how many amps the battery can put out.
So 250 in that case?
So 250 amps, which for most cars is plenty.
Okay, cool.
Alright.
So for anyone who's not at all sure, basically chat to your local model store.
Exactly. So if you have 5000 milliamp and you have a 20C, for example, so you're only going to be able to put out 100 amps.
100 amps, yeah.
So as long as you know that your car, your power system, isn't going to be drawing more than 100 amps continuously, you should be okay to still use that battery.
Okay.
In a car like this that shouldn't really pull all that many amps, something like this will be more than enough. So what this is going to do, it's not going to push the power to the car. You're not going to blow up your car because you've got excessive amount of amps. You're just going to get really efficient power going through the car. It's not. You're not going to strain the battery. You're not going to overload the ESC. You're not going to do anything like that that's going to create any problems. So it's kind of like running a high octane fuel in your normal car. You're going to have really nice clean running. Maybe get a few extra Ks out of it. You know what I mean?
But it's not going to turn it into a Ferrari.
But it's not going to turn it into a Ferrari. Just because you're running Optimax in it or something like that.
Okay.
So.
Cool. So you mentioned LiPo bags. What's a LiPo bag?
Alright, so with LiPo batteries and the chargers that you can get for them. Now, these chargers, and there's various different price points. I mean, this is a $70 charger, but you can spend upwards of $300 for a charger that can do 4 batteries at once, that runs higher amps, so you can charge faster, or bigger batteries. But there is a safety element involved when working with LiPo batteries. One of them being the storage charge. So unlike your nickel metals, where you would be able to store them at full charge without too many hassles, these don't like to be stored fully depleted, so at 3.2 or 3.4 volts, or they don't like to be stored at full charge either. Now we're talking about long periods of time, weeks, maybe a couple of months. You don't really want to leave them fully charged. So there is this thing called storage charge. All of these new chargers will have that function.
That's so clever.
So you can just put it on storage charge. Storage charge is usually around about the 3.7 volts per cell. So it should be somewhere around between 40 to 60% charge. And that's how this battery should be charged at the most. So if I plug a little meter in here to show me how much I've got charge in here, it should be sitting somewhere between 40 to 60%. And that's where you want to store them. So if you charge up a battery, you're planning to go out and it starts raining, or you go, okay, well I'm going to go on a holiday or whatever, and you know that you've got that battery on full charge, make sure you discharge it to a storage charge and then put it away.
Clever.
Now, with LiPo bags, these come in to kind of help prevent any mishaps that the batteries may have. Because as careful as we may be in charging these and putting them on storage and making sure that they don't, we don't abuse our LiPo packs, there is always the 0.00001% chance that something could go wrong. Because at the end of the day, these are mass-produced. They're a chemical cell. And when you've got them on charge, even using them in cars, they can go wrong. They can falter. So, LiPo bags. This is a small little LiPo bag that's kind of like a box bag when it opens up. So essentially, I'll take this one out of here to show you. When you're charging your batteries, the idea is that you charge them in here. So this pops up like so.
Oh, cool.
See how that opens up?
Yep.
Your LiPo goes in here. You have the cables and everything sort of coming out, and you can charge it like so, with the cable sticking out.
Sure.
And you can charge the battery like that.
So if anything did go wrong...
If anything goes wrong. So these are what's called a fire retardant bag. Because if you Google LiPo battery fails or LiPo battery fires, when these explode, they explode like a jet engine. So you can get smoke, only smoke, which isn't bad, and it smells horrible, by the way.
I can imagine.
But when the flames come out, it's like a jet flame.
Wow. Okay,
out of these cells.
Bad. Yeah.
So it sounds really scary, but the percentage is so minute
I'm sure.
that these would not be out for sale for the general public if they were not classified as safe.
Yep.
So always make sure that you buy good quality batteries. Avoid no-name brands. Do some research to make sure you're getting something decent, because the last thing you want to do is go, oh, I got a really cheap battery, $20, and then you use it a couple of times, and the next thing you know, it's on the charger and it just explodes.
Yeah, I understand.
Another safety note is obviously how you transport them. So there are larger bags that you can have. You put them in here when you're taking them out to the field. I normally have a couple of bags. So I have one for my charged batteries, and as I discharge them and use them in my cars, I then pop them into a discharge bag. So I'll have them labelled or stick it up in some way so I don't know which is which.
Yep.
And that's usually the best way to do it, to transport them around. When charging your battery, it is always recommended that you are at home and in the same room, preferably. Don't charge them in the garage next to your fuel lawnmower.
Sure.
You know what I mean? Like, don't charge them where it's volatile if something goes wrong, like under curtains or around any sort of flammable thing.
Sure.
Have a nice clear area somewhere when you charge them. Don't put them on charge and then go take the dog for a walk.
Yep.
I kid you not, there was a story on YouTube from a drone guy who did exactly that. He had batteries on charge. He took his dog for a walk. He was only going to go around the block. He came back and found his garage on fire.
Wow. Okay.
Okay. And he has been doing this for years. He's been doing this for years, but it's always that one time.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's always that one time where you turn your back to them, and that's when things go wrong.
Yeah,
and that story is echoed all over the world from people that misuse them or just aren't there to take care of them. Some people take it to extremes. They make little cement barriers. They store all their LiPos in, especially in America, they use ammo boxes. So, you know, they do all of these sort of really extreme, cautious things. Like I said, the percentage of something goes wrong is very, very, very minute. Obviously, if you're using an older battery that's been a bit beat up a bit, still working, but it's been a bit beat up, take a little bit of extra care.
Yeah, of course.
Don't take these things for granted, because, it's that one time when you mess up and it goes very, very bad. So that is why LiPo bags and charge boxes like this exist.
Very good to know.
And it's just important to know this and have this in the back of your mind, because they're not, you can't be as flippant in charging them as you are with nickel metals. Nickel metals are a little bit more trustworthy. They're a lot simpler design. But with LiPos, you do need to take that little bit extra care.
Really good to know. I've never heard that before, so
Alright.
Really, really good to know. Okay, thanks.
That's alright.
So, servos. We should probably talk about servos.
Servos. Alright, so there's an abundance of different types of servos that you can get out there. There's different brands, different strengths, different sizes.
Sure.
For something like this, when you're looking at a two-wheel drive, 10 scale buggy, you're not going to put a lot of load on the front steering.
Yep.
When you go four-wheel drive, you need a little bit of a stronger servo, because then at that point you have a centrifugal force that's being forced on the wheels rather than just free spinning wheels.
Sure. Yep.
So you need a servo that can hold position. So if you ever had a spinning wheel and you hold it in between your hands, a spinning wheel,
I've done
and you try to turn it, you can actually feel it fighting you.
Yep.
So it's the same thing with wheels like this. So the servo needs to be strong enough to be able to hold that. And that's really something that you'll learn as you build more kits, or you ask somebody that can sort of gauge from experience what size or what strength of servo that you're going to need.
Sure.
For something like this, you're not going to need something that's any bigger than, say, a 8 kilo servo like this one here.
Okay.
So this retails for about $42. It's Servos. It has metal gears in it. so essentially means that it's going to last you quite a bit, as opposed to something that has plastic gears.
Yep.
But given that it's a lightweight buggy, you don't have to spend money on titanium gears or something like that.
Sure,
That's like
okay.
pushing $100
Okay.
for a servo. You don't necessarily need to do that. I mean, you can, but you don't need to.
Yep. You wouldn't really notice a performance difference, would you? Like,
No, once you sort of have the weight nutted out, you know what weight you want the servo to be able to pull. The only performance gain you're going to get is speed.
Okay.
So how fast you want that servo to be.
Sure.
Obviously, for the general public, you don't need to go supersonic on your speed.
Yeah.
You can get just something that's fairly basic, like 1.13 seconds response time.
That's pretty good.
Right, which is not bad.
Yeah.
So that's going to give you fairly accurate steering. You're not going to really have too many issues. If you're in a racing environment, and every nanosecond counts as far as responsiveness with what you're doing on the radio and the car,
yeah.
That's a whole different level.
Mm-hmm.
So this radio is very basic radio. It's an $80 radio. You can buy a radio that's worth $900.
Wow. Okay.
Okay. So that has minimal latency. It's like 0.03 of a second or something like
that's
that.
fast. Yeah.
All right. And the servo is not going to be the only issue. You then have the radio to consider as well, which is why you upgrade to those sorts of radios. And then you're going to be looking at servos that have equivalent 0.03.
Sure. That's pretty hardcore.
Super fast for two-wheel drive buggies. So for around this price point, plenty for this type of vehicle. You're not going to need more than that. I think that'll be fine.
Cool. So are there any extra goodies you can buy to sort of hop up your car to make it run better? Any sort of added extras or things that make it perform?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's always the option to do little hop-ups here and there. Now, one of the things that you can do, especially with these Tamiya cars, is a lot of them will come with bushings on the wheels. So it's basically like this brass composite type of little bushing where it's the size of a bearing. You would think, why wouldn't they put bearings? So obviously bushings are a lot cheaper. They do last a while, but they wear out.
Sure.
They're a part that over time will start to wear out to where everything would be nice and snug. At one point, eventually, it starts to have play.
Sure.
And then things start to get wobbly and the wheels start to go a little bit funny. So what a lot of people tend to do is when they're building these kits, you can either leave them as they are, if you're not going to be using them very much, or if it's more of a project thing where we get a lot of people in here that build these sort of cars for nostalgia purposes.
Yeah.
Because they'll say, oh, I was a kid, I used to build it.
You got me in one.
They're not really fussy about the performance upgrades or doing anything like that. They're happy just to build it, have it running, and most of the time they're shelf queens.
Yeah.
Okay? So that's where they sit. Now, if you are planning on using a car and it comes with bushings, and you go, well, I want to get a little bit more better efficiency out of this, you can switch it out to bearings. So in a lot of the Tamiya manuals, there will actually be a bearing upgrade kit, part number of sorts that you can always order and get. And as you're building the kit, where the bushings would go, you put bearings. And obviously that's going to give you smoother running. And if you have smoother running, then again, going back to the battery thing, you start to draw less amps, so because there's less resistance, and you have more efficiency from your power system. So your batteries will last you a little bit longer. You might get an extra minute or two here and there. And of course, you'll have a vehicle that can perhaps go just that little bit quicker as well, because it doesn't have a friction point as such with bushings. It's a lot smoother being ball bearings.
Okay, cool. So, would you recommend, when people are buying the controller, the transmitter, I believe it's called, do you recommend for cars the wheel type or the two-stick type?
It's not really a question of recommending, it's more of a preference to individual. 99% of people nowadays use wheel radios just like this one. But there are people that still prefer the stick radio. When I started in the hobby, I was using a stick radio. I was using an old Futaba, it was just a 2-channel. So up and down for the throttle, left and right for steering, and that's how I learned, that's how I drove.
Yeah, me too.
So eventually I made the switch out to wheel radios, and it just becomes a little bit more natural. It takes a little bit of time to adjust. But if you just turn the radio a little bit, it's almost as if you are steering normal steering wheel. Okay. So it then becomes a little bit more natural. As you get used to it, pulling the trigger to go forward, pulling it back to go back or hit the brakes, it's a lot easier.
Okay, so it's a bit more intuitive. Okay.
Yeah, I don't know. The only stick radios I do now is when I fly planes and quads and things like that. But yeah, for cars, definitely the wheel radio is the way to go.
Okay, cool. What would you recommend? Is like, it doesn't have to be a Tamiya, but what would you recommend if you wanted to build your own RC car? What would be the best one for a beginner to start with? Is there one that stands out?
There is. We have one that is from Horizon Hobby. It's called the ECX Amp.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's a monster truck, but essentially you can get the exact same car. You can get it as a ready to run.
Yep. Okay.
So basically, you take it out of the box, charge your battery up, away you go.
Okay.
But they offer it in a kit, so they give you everything: battery, charger, remote, motors, everything you need except a can of paint to paint the body. That's the only thing you need to get. But they give you everything in there, and you essentially build it just like the ready to run one. But the difference is that, you know, you get parents that come in and say, I want my kid to sort of be a bit more hands-on.
Yep.
So they'll buy that for their kids.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Because it's a more modern vehicle. It doesn't have the nostalgia appeal that these sort of cars have. So they'll buy those kits, and it's basically everything's in the box, except for the can of paint, as I said. And that would be probably the best one that I would recommend. It's a nice, simple design. It's not too complicated. The Tamiya kits, some of them I would recommend, some. Mm-hmm. There are some that can be quite complicated, can be a bit overwhelming.
Sure. Is that like the full drive ones?
Yeah. Some of those can be a little bit overwhelming. So for a first kit, you know, it really depends on how good you are at following instructions or reading instructions.
Yeah.
You know, how your brain works, I guess, because some people can really just get it. Other people struggle to just change a wheel or an RC. So it really comes down to the individual as well, how much of a challenge they want.
Sure.
I've always been very mechanical in that way, so I've never really had too much of an issue. But I know that some people will struggle with this for a first kit.
Yep.
Others would breeze through it.
Sure.
So it really, it's hard.
Okay, cool. Look, I think that's pretty much every question I had, Vasco, so I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much, man.
You're welcome, no
It's
problem.
been an absolute pleasure.
No problem.
Thanks, Vasco. So yeah, look, I'm going to go and buy some stuff to build my kit, and look out for the next episode where I actually start to build it. All right, thanks so much, Vasco, and thank you to Metro Hobbies too. Really appreciate your time.
All right, no problem.
Thank you.